Okay, so we're recording now, you guys. Um, Welcome, everyone, to our annual Helen Fluker Award and usually luncheon. And you all can have lunch while you're with us, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll get together in person this year, so it's great to have everybody here on Zoom. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead. And so, Janice.
Okay, I'm glad to see you all here. Sorry we can't be in person and actually eat together, but welcome, and also a special welcome. We have two members of the Fluker family here, James Fluker and Jamila Alonzo. If you want to wave so everybody knows who you are, that would be great. Thank you for coming. Helen Naramore Fluker was born March 22nd, 1919 in Wichita. She attended Lawrence schools and graduated from KU. She worked for the Department of the Army before joining the Department of State, holding posts around the world. She returned to Lawrence in 1974, where she became involved in a number of community organizations. She joined the League of Women Voters of Lawrence and served as a member of the local board of directors and the League of Women Voters of Kansas board of directors. Helen's experience in the foreign as well as local political scene made her a unique resource for Lawrence League of Women Voters. She twice served as chapter president. Her primary interest was in promoting open and accessible government, which is where this all comes from. She encouraged open discussion by everyone and was never reluctant to express her own personal point of view. She insisted particularly that the League maintain its nonpartisan policy. The Helen Fluker Open and Accessible Government Award was established in 1998 in her memory. The League of Women Voters Douglas County confers this award each year to a Kansas resident. At one time, it was just a Lawrence Douglas County resident, but we've expanded that and found some wonderful people to honor as a result. Our goal is to confer the award each year to someone whose efforts have promoted improvement in government. So Seal, if you would like to introduce our present honoree, that would be great.
Oh, thank you, Janice. In 2013, Davis Hammet moved to Topeka, Kansas to co-create the rainbow-colored Equality House across from the Westboro Baptist Church hate group. He began organizing across the state on a variety of issues and turned his attention to voting rights following the 2014 election, which he saw dramatically low youth participation. In 2015, he founded Loud Light to address the disparity in civic engagement with this goal of developing a critical mass of youth voters turnout that transform Kansas. Loud Light has since registered thousands of young Kansans. The organization runs yearly voter engagement programs at colleges across Kansas, trains young Kansans how to understand and shape power, and produces a popular video series on what's happening inside the Kansas government that's followed by citizens and lawmakers alike. Regarding voting rights in Kansas, Hammet advocated for the creation of election audits, contested the 2018 primary, raising awareness of uncounted provisional ballots, and successfully sued the government for open records. He currently is working to research and address the remaining obstacles to block citizens from voting or leave their ballots uncounted. Davis has been mentioned, his work has been mentioned across the nation in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and most other major outlets. So we really appreciate Davis and his work, and we'll turn this over to Denise for the actual award.
Hi, I'm Denise Pettengill, the chair of the Hot Topic Committee, and I would like to, on behalf of the Lawrence Douglas County League of Women Voters and the Fluker family, I would like to present this year's honoree with the Helen N. Fluker Open and Accessible Government Award for 2020. And we'll get this platter to you, Davis, somehow. So congratulations, well deserved.
Thank you.
And if you would like to go ahead and start your remarks, Davis, that would be great.
Sure. All right, everyone can hear me? Yeah, that's good. All right. Thank all of y'all so much. First off, I always feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in Kansas. I moved here in 2013, and there's been so much remarkable work here for, over a century. But that's especially true when it comes to the League of Women Voters and all of the voting rights and citizen engagement work that the organization has done in the various county chapters. So this means a lot to me for so many reasons. I know whenever I was debating creating Loud Light, I had actually gone and talked to, at that time, the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters to essentially ask permission, right? Because I just have so much respect for the League, and I wanted to make sure that we were working together side by side. And they granted me permission to do it. So I guess that's how I ended up here. So kind of as was mentioned, in 2013, January of 2013, I moved to Kansas, kind of serendipitously. That was also when Chris Kobach's SAFE Act, the documentary proof of citizenship, so like the birth certificate requirement, was going into effect that month. So there's kind of some magical timing there. And I started working on a variety of issues. I was an activist, mainly working on human rights. And the first thing I noticed was just the huge disconnect between the government and the people here, and really the politics and the people of Kansas. Because everyone I was talking to, even if I was just, at the gas station talking to the clerk, no one agreed with what was happening. And so I was like, how is this possible? How does everyone disagree with what's happening in the government? I mean, everyone across the political spectrum, but it keeps on going this way. And that's kind of led me on this long journey. One of the first things that I did was start going to protest at the State House. And I realized how many barriers there really were to even protesting at the State House, which many of those barriers have now been struck down in courts. And I guess a great example of this would actually be in 2017, where it was December of 2017, and we found out that they were going to try to instate a $500 fee to protest at the State House. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but funny enough, I had applied for a protest permit, and I was the first person they called to ask for $500. And I was like, what? And we helped, really blow that up and let people understand why that would be such a problem. I mean, the idea that your free speech isn't free, right? That it would cost $500 to exercise free speech was absurd. And we helped, build outrage about that. And ultimately, then the Brownback administration reversed course. And actually now through the ACLU's lawsuit, which I was a witness in, where I talked about the last 7 years of a variety of illegal practices of suppressing free speech at the State House. Now the State House has removed all the fees to protest, and they have made it so you don't have to have a legislative sponsor. And I think those were huge wins, really, for constitutional rights and for the people of Kansas to be able to access their government. Sorry, I just am trying to think. There's just so many things I can talk to with League members, and so it's always hard because it's kind of like being amongst family, like people who actually care about all these things about government and transparency and rights. But another thing that happened was in 2014, after that election, as was mentioned, I was looking at the election data, and I saw that Kansas had one of the lowest youth turnouts in the nation. And part of that was, the voter suppression, right, which has now been ruled unconstitutional. Part of it was apathy. And I know with so many members of the League, a lot of us were scared to register voters because handling birth certificates is a scary proposition. So we started Loud Light. One of the first things is the first year, really, it was me kind of by myself running around on college campuses trying to stop people and register them. Since then, it's grown to programs on every major college campus and many community colleges, where we recruit students and train them how to organize their campus, talk to them about why voting matters and how to engage their peers in meaningful but nonpartisan ways about elections and getting involved in shaping your community. That's helped us to register thousands of people. In the State House, along so many times I've been sitting next to Seal in elections committee for a couple years now, and really right along with the league fighting back. Every year there are bills to try to make it harder to vote, to put up new barriers, and speaking out against those bills and making sure the public knows about those bills and stopping them, but also speaking out for good bills and helping to get them passed. One thing I'm especially proud of is the election audits. Right now, we actually, it took many years. I know some of you were probably involved in that. And it was certainly a learning process for me about how the legislative process really works. I think it took about 4 or 5 years to get an election audit passed. But now every election, right after the election, they do a small recount, hand recount of a portion of the votes to make sure that everything came out accurately. And I think that was a huge win for people being able to trust in election results. We also had in 2018, in that historically close election in the primary, y'all might recall the Republican governor primary, where it was Chris Kobach and Jeff Collier. And in the end, it came down to less than 350 votes. I believe it was the closest statewide election in Kansas history. And I was doing a bunch of research into that because I think many of us thought there was going to be this big legal battle over that. But then Jeff Collier conceded the race, but I had done all this research, so I decided to object myself to the outcome of the election and went before the election board. And while they dismissed my objection to the election, it did help raise awareness. And then that's was part of the legislature passing the signature cure bill, which is now in effect for this election, where if you send in a mail ballot, if you forgot to sign it, or if they claim that your signature didn't match, they actually have to try to contact you and give you the opportunity to cure and fix that so your vote is counted. None of us could have imagined that a couple years from then we would be in a pandemic, but it's stuff like that, that background work of constantly fighting to improve democracy, that sometimes something like this happens. And there's people who are constantly sending me articles and they're like, look what's happening in Pennsylvania with mail ballots. And I get to tell them, we don't have to worry about that. We've actually passed laws already to deal with those problems in advance. The same is true on things like how your mail ballot only has to be postmarked on election day, but it can be received until the following Friday. And actually the Secretary of State has the authority to even extend that deadline longer. And the last thing I guess I'll talk about before I would love to open it up to any questions y'all have is the videos that we do at Loud Light, and how that was kind of an accident, where it was the beginning of 2017, the first week of the legislature, and it was a brand new legislature coming in. A third of them were newly elected. This was the kind of the peak of the tax experiment budget crisis, right? Where we were all hearing huge numbers, where they were telling us, there's $1 billion budget gap. And that sounds bad, but what does that mean? And as the media world has really been hurting, as we've been losing local papers, as we've been losing investigative journalists, there wasn't a lot of material to help people understand what that meant. What were the consequences of that? And so by accident, I posted up in the corner of my bedroom, and with my laptop's webcam, I made a short video. I knew nothing about making videos or editing. And I just put out this 3-minute video, like, here's the big obstacles the legislature is about to deal with. And I ended it by saying, if this was helpful, let me know, and maybe I'll do it again. And then it took off. And now, like, every week of my life during legislative session for the last 4 years has been making recap videos. And then on top of that, we started building it out where we wanted to go more in depth than just here's the big highlights. And probably the video that I'm still most proud of was the budget, the tax experiment explainer video we did, where I spent months in the State House Library, and I love the State House librarians. Have a totally new appreciation for librarians in the research department after that experience. But we put together data that put Kansas finances in a 100-year perspective to show people why what's happening was so uniquely damaging to the state. And it was really self-inflicted. And it was this 9-minute video that was extremely nerdy. It had tons of numbers and moving graphs. And when I went to put it out, after pouring months of work into it, I thought, I wonder if anyone's even gonna watch it. And to my surprise, it just took off, and over 250,000 people watched it. All sorts of national news was calling me to talk about what we had found. And two really important things that happened were a lot of legislators started asking me to come to their office and talk about it. And again, legislators across the political spectrum, because I was also explaining how Kansas had been building up all this debt that no one really talks about. And then also importantly is the public started engaging in this in a deeper level. And that's really what I view as the power of this video and this information and really open and transparent government is when people have information, accurate information about a policy, about a decision, about their options, they're able to meaningfully engage. And they're able to hold their elected officials accountable in a way that we simply cannot do if we don't have information, if we don't have access to open records. And it gives people that agency that gives you power to actually be a stakeholder in shaping the state and shaping our communities and shaping our counties. And so I love doing this work so much across the board from, we just had a successful lawsuit for open records against the Secretary of State over this summer around provisional data, so that, again, if you don't know the problem, you can't fix it. And as we got into actually researching provisional data, we're able to talk about what real solutions are. But whenever people in the government hide records, are intentionally covering up things and being secret, it harms everyone, right? And it harms them, right? So with that, I'll open up to questions, but I just want to say I'm so honored for this award, and I'm so honored also to be able to do this work every day alongside the League of Women Voters of Douglas County and really in all the chapters across the state. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Davis. The work that you are doing is invaluable, I think. And I really do see a difference in the engagement of our youth. College students are energized, and I think that they connect with you. The videos that you do are amazing. I watch them. They're great. And so I personally, I really appreciate everything that you do, and I know that our chapter sure does. Does anyone have questions for Davis? I see.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Davis, first of all, let me just say, this is Lois Orthlos. Let me just say, your video explaining school finance was the best explanation I have ever heard, and I appreciate it so much. But I do have a question about what you're trying to do, given COVID-19, what kind of efforts you're having to get students registered on college campuses for this next round of elections. Do you have any work going there?
Yeah, I mean, I know, like y'all are experiencing, it's been a nightmare on every front, right? Trying to think through this, and we're always back and forth on what we can do. There's a couple different fronts to this. One thing we've been working on for a couple years is getting more universities to be a part of what's called the NSOLVE, or it's like National Students Learn Voter Engagement Survey. It's out of Tufts University, and they actually take student enrollment lists, and the university gives it to them, right? Because they're another research institution, it's all private, but they match it against the national voter file. And that allows the universities to actually be able to measure how many students are registered and how many students voted. And that data, you know, it takes a year for it to come out, but that's been really helpful because you don't really have a way, you know, you don't have a baseline. Until you measure something, you don't know what you're trying to fix or where you're trying to go. So what we found is once schools get enrolled in that and start getting data, the school administrators start thinking about it completely differently, right? Because there's actually something to be held accountable to. So trying to get schools to start to measure the data and then to step up. Actually, under the Federal Higher Education Act, colleges are supposed to offer students the opportunity to register to vote. There's not really any teeth to enforce that law, so a lot of universities kind of ignore it, or they just will be like, oh, there's a voter registration form at the you know, at the student service desk. And we've worked with some schools to try to get them to do a better job of sending out campus-wide emails to students, of being like, you know, hey, it's National Voter Registration Day, or you only have a week left to register, and links to things like ksvotes.org. I mean, I could talk about that too, right? So ksvotes.org was something that we were a part of and that, you know, Brian McClendon really helped make happen, the guy who made Google Earth, which is a digital federal form. So just on your smartphone, you can get registered really quick. I know many people in the league are familiar with that. But getting universities to also to push out that, right? And now we're encouraging universities to push out information about how students can vote by mail. So that's one thing. The other thing is we are still recruiting students on college campuses to be their campus organizers. And that looks different, right? It's going to look like getting them to try to talk to professors about, you know, at the beginning of because a lot of stuff is probably going to be on Zoom. I know that most colleges are coming back in person for now. I think it's very reasonable to assume that that won't last a very long time before many colleges realize that COVID's spreading too quickly and they need to go home. So we're kind of trying to get students to be digital organizers, right? So going into things like Blackboard is the online space that a lot of these have, and getting students to talk to their peers on that. And then also on social media, right? Just getting more people to have that kind of cultural impact. When more people talk about voting, more people vote. It's really as simple as that, right? So kind of on both fronts, it is a little hard. I mean, the issue is that democracy is social, and so nothing will ever replace that, you know, one-on-one, being able to meet someone in the street or outside of a concert or, you know, outside their classroom and talk to them. But we're doing the best we can to kind of emulate that with the digital, in the digital spaces we have.
Could you talk a little bit more about the result of this provisional data lawsuit?
Yeah. Again, like this started in 2018, the really close Republican primary. And one of the reasons they denied my objection is they said, you can't prove that the outcome would be changed. And I said, I can't prove it because y'all are illegally not giving me the data that would prove it. And so the first course was actually in 2019, and the ACLU of Kansas represented me. Zal and Lauren and their legal departments have been amazing through the 2 lawsuits we've done. And the first one was actually against Johnson County. We sued Johnson County for access to the data. And this was actually getting access to list of provisional voters. So actually knowing who voted provisionally, why they had to vote provisionally, and if their vote was ultimately counted or not. And all these are important pieces of information because, again, if you don't know where the problem is, you can't fix it. And so we sued Johnson County. We got the data. Last summer, I started trying to get the data from everywhere, but then I decided I was going to try to just get it from the Secretary of State instead of bothering 105 county clerks. And the Secretary of State for really over almost a year, just essentially kind of let me on. They were denying it for a variety of reasons that we knew were wrong, and we were explaining to them why they were wrong. And then it got to a point where we were just so close to this election that it was, you know, either we just get dragged along, you know, and given excuses, or we have to sue. And so we sued them and actually won in Shawnee County Court. So that's what kind of governs the state government. You know, that's how you sue the state government, as it starts out in Shawnee County where Topeka is. And we won that lawsuit. So we've been getting the data for this year, some of it for the primary kind of incrementally, but we were able to get a first wave of data between the election and the canvass, which is a week or two after the election. And we were able to call people and help them cure issues, because while now they have to call for signature issues, they still don't have to call for photo ID issues. So, you know, maybe you went there and you realized you didn't have your driver's license. And so we've been able to actually call those people and remind them, like, hey, did you know you have 3 days to turn in a copy of a photo ID? Do you have a photo ID? Do you know how to get that in? Here's your options. As a kind of side note, so that was like the legal basis of it, right? And that's actually, I think, a good thing. Again, this is standard in most states, trying to cure ballots. In many states, the Secretary of State takes it upon themselves to try to facilitate this and make sure every vote counts. Along this process, though, I did find, you know, Johnson County has historically been the last decade like one of the worst counties for elections. I mean, has just had disaster after disaster. Connie Schmidt came in, who had retired. She came out of retirement to help facilitate this election. And when I got the data from them in that interim, I was so confused. I had to call her because she was curing everything. And I talked to her, and she was calling people and getting them to fix photo IDs. And she was actually, she didn't understand why I was so shocked. And she was like, we used to always do this. And what I've realized is it really is something that it's only over the last decade that Kansas elections really got pretty nasty. There used to be really good norms about, like, you know, from the government officials of fighting to make every vote count. That kind of went away. So again, I think it's a positive thing that whenever people know they're looking at it, right? I know other clerks who are probably only helping people cure ballots because they know we can get the data now, right? And they know that they're gonna have people calling them upset if they don't help them get them fixed. So yeah.
So we had a couple of questions on chat, Davis. One is, are you working on same-day voter registration?
Okay, yes is the general thing. That's taken a couple turns. The 3-week voter registration deadline is the biggest obstacle, I would argue, to democracy in Kansas today. The issue is that, I mean, it disproportionately impacts young people and people who just moved to the state. But actually, from some data that we got of provisionals, what surprised me researching the 2018 data is the biggest group that this impacts is actually people registered to vote in Kansas who have moved to a new county in Kansas. If you move within your county, you should always update your registration. But if you move within the county, they'll let you update it. You know, they'll let you update it within the county. And if there's a smaller district, that vote won't count, but you can go there and still cast a provisional and update your registration, and it will count. But if you move across the county line, even though they'll look you up and they'll see you're a registered Kansan, but you're just registered right across the county line, they reject your ballot and throw it out. But then they will still update your registration for next time. And that surprised me, right? I always assumed the biggest impact would be on young people. But actually, the biggest group is already registered to vote Kansans are being disenfranchised by the 3-week registration deadline. And also, I'll note really quickly that Chris Kobach actually expanded it to 3 weeks. It was only 2 weeks for decades in Kansas. And then Kobach expanded it to 3 weeks, which disenfranchised more people. The kind of compromise bill, it's not really same-day voter registration. It's provisional voter registration. And so what it allows you to do is right now, if you go in and you're not registered, you know, or if they have any concern, you go in, they say, we don't see you. So you fill out a voter registration form, you cast a provisional ballot, and then they put the things together. And then after at the election office, they're trying to look you up. And again, if you're not registered, they will get you registered. They add you to the system for the future, but they don't count your vote. Our argument is really, Kansas is already doing same-day voter registration. they're just throwing out the votes of the people for that round, and they don't need to. So we would say, do exactly what you're doing. We actually had a bill to do that, and it went through the Senate Elections Committee and the County Clerks Association. So all the election officials, the Election Official Association of Kansas, supported the bill. And they testified saying, we're already doing all this work. We're just being forced by the law to throw out people's votes for that election. And they wanted it. And actually the Secretary of State of Kansas was the only opposition to the bill and essentially killed the bill. But we hope to build momentum on that. Because again, I mean, I would prefer it to be that you don't have to cast a provisional, but if that's the compromise, at least the same goal can be achieved, right? And then they can feel good because they can go back and check and make sure you didn't vote in another county. But a provisional same day is, I think, the path forward for Kansas. And I really hope something we get in the next 2 years, because again, there's no reason to have that 3-week registration deadline.
Then the next one is, what are you doing with high school students? Amber asked that question.
So we have really focused mainly on college students. So we haven't done programs directly with high schools. I know in a couple counties, the League of Women Voters really has pretty robust high school programs. While we've never done anything, well, I guess I shouldn't say never. I mean, we've had high schools reach out to us and we'll talk to them about how to engage their students. There's a really great curriculum for high schools that I'd be happy to give to everyone, that Rock the Vote, who Rock the Vote's partnered with Loud Light a couple of times, which is kind of amazing to have started this kind of like youth engagement group and have Rock the Vote reach out to us. But they have really good curriculum that I'd be happy to provide to anyone. That they call like Week of Democracy, which are already pre-made lesson plans about the history of voting rights and other things and how you get registered. But we've never actually directly done programs in high schools. That being said, sometimes we've had interns where like exceptional interns who are high schoolers, you know, because they were kind of so mature, we've allowed them to be a part of some of our internship programs that are geared towards college students. But we haven't really focused on high schools, in part because capacity too, right? I mean, we are, Loud Light is mostly me and Anita Austin, our program director. So it's really 2 people. And now we have 2 other part-time people, so it's growing. But yeah, we've been kind of limited on that front.
It's very excited that you're growing though. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Part-timers, that's great. The Lawrence League did do a slideshow that we sent out to all of the high schools in the area, which I think was pretty well received. And from what I understand from Jamie Shue, the voter registrations for high school students were fairly steady. Thank goodness. Yeah. But I would love to get that. I know our voter services people would too. If you could share that Rock the Vote information, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Question, and this is kind of just, I talked with Jamie Shue yesterday, and we were talking about the recount, the Shannon Portillo and Nancy Thelman recount. And you probably know that it came back that Shannon won by 3 votes. The thing that was really striking to me when Jamie and I were talking was that 213 of those votes, votes left that blank. They skipped over it and voted for DA and sheriff, and they didn't vote for that county commissioner seat. So, and I think it goes back to voter education, probably. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do we get that covered?
Yeah, so the undervote, right, where people maybe, and this is especially true in presidential elections, right? So people might vote for president, but then they leave the rest of the ballot blank. I think a lot of this is, voting's hard and it's intimidating, right? And it can be really hard to get information now. I know so many local papers don't really do voter guides anymore. And so information can be so inaccessible. you know, this is my whole life. And I even remember I was in 2019, I was in the voting booth and I didn't realize that I got to vote for a certain district school board. And so I was in the voting booth like, oh no, what do I do? Like, I don't want to make the mistake. And so, I mean, I went through, you know, and like, luckily I had my phone, I kind of went through and I was able to sit there a little longer in the booth than I probably should have and like text some people and figure it out. But voting in those down ballot races can be really intimidating. And even if you're very informed, it can be hard to understand the difference of candidates. I mean, in 2015, I remember not even, by the way, I have a degree like with honors in political science, and I didn't really understand what a county commissioner was, right? Like it's these things that someone has to teach you. Like you don't know what these things do. It's the same issue. One of the big things I talk to college students about is I'm like, the president isn't deciding student debt, right? The state legislature is in a lot of ways, right? Like it's state funding of higher education that has been defunded, and it's why students are going into debt. I mean, obviously there's a lot of complicated factors, but the state legislature sets tuition, like approves tuition rates. And the thing is, most college students don't even understand what the state legislature is. I'm sure y'all have had the experience of asking someone, who's your state representative? And they tell you their US representative, right? If they know that, right? Most people don't know that even, you know, their state senator or state representative. And I know we have one of each on the call right now. So it's, I don't really like blame them, right? And I think that that's on everyone, right? I think that's a failure of our education system, even though, you know, I think it's great and we put so many burdens on our education system. But American, like things like American government isn't civics, right? Like there's these other things that we've kind of lost, which is about making people invested in being a meaningful member of their community, right? And getting engaged. But I think even as the league, right, this can be a hard thing for me, because if you are a nonprofit, how do you make voter guides that are carefully nonpartisan, right? That can be a very difficult thing, because you want to be able to tell someone this person supports this person opposes this, but you really can't do that super clearly if you're a nonprofit, you know? So, so I think it's just an information gap that's really on all of us, right? It's on the education system, it's on reforming state laws, it's on us as civic organizations to try to step up and inform people of that. And it's on candidates, right? It's on candidates to reach out to these people and make their case of why they should vote, you know, the whole ballot and vote down. I've had some different folks I know running for those kind of down ballot races. And that's one of the things I encourage them to do. I'm like, if you want to win people's votes, you should look at districts where people just aren't finishing their ballots. And that's where you should do work, is like try to earn the votes of people who don't even vote in those races because they don't feel like it matters to them.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And we have things like Vote 411 and Ballotpedia and all of those things. But if people don't know about them, and if the candidates then don't answer the questions and respond, there's nothing there. So yeah, it's the eternal trying to get people engaged, right?
I have a question. This is Lois again. Davis, I'm wondering if you have any information about the number of people who might not have ever received their mail-in ballot, because I personally know that my nephew never received his, and he would have been voting in that county commission race that was won by 3 votes, which makes it even more amazing. So I don't know how to figure that out. The county clerk can demonstrate that the ballot got as far as Wichita, which is where he's living right now, but he never received it. Is there any way to know how many people did not actually receive the ballots? I know we can figure out how many people sent them back, but they were received too late to count. Is there a way to know who never received it in the first place?
Gosh, I mean, I think that I'm not sure, because it would depend on kind of what the mail tracking system is that they have set up, right? Because I mean, as you'll know, you can have some mail that, you know, is well documented, right? Where like they scan it and you can see that it arrived at people's doorstep or not. Some mail doesn't have that level of tracking. So I would guess it would kind of depend on that. It's something that would also depend on the county. I mean, the other thing is it would depend on what kind of postage is the county paying for. As a kind of quick side note, you know, we've been doing research into some stuff, and we found, I think there's about there's 105 counties in Kansas. I think about 30 counties prepaid the postage, right? Which is great, where it's like, you know, you get it and you can send it back, which I know Jamie Shu here in Douglas County is, you know, is an amazing county clerk. And he really kind of, I think, brought that to the forefront for a lot of counties and advocated for that. But in some counties, it costs as much as 3 stamps to mail your ballot back, right? In a handful of counties, which is, I mean, again, I think it's kind of absurd that really depending on what county you're in depends on how hard it will be for you to vote, how accessible voting will be, and the likelihood of you voting, right? Because of the standards they use for provisional ballots. So I don't know, I can look into that. And it's a really interesting question. But that's also something where I think it's good that it is, if they didn't receive that ballot, they could still go vote in person on election day, right? Like you can go and you vote a provisional ballot, and if they see it wasn't, you know, that you didn't return your mail ballot, they're counting your provisional ballot. So there is a backup, although I know it's not ideal. The other thing is you can actually request an additional mail ballot. You can call the election office and say, I didn't receive my mail ballot, and they will send you a new mail ballot. It will be provisional, but if it's only one you get, they will count it.
So one of the things I've told people is that just what you said, if they haven't received their ballot and it should have been there by then, to go ahead and vote provisionally. The problem is with this one was the timing. It was not possible for him to get back and vote once we realized he wasn't going to get it. But thank you.
So we have another question via chat. Jane Imber says, as Douglas County grows, I'm concerned about the county election head being appointed rather than elected. Is there anything you're doing to address the appointment versus selection of county clerks around the state? Oh, and Boog did reply to this too. I think members of the local delegation are keeping an eye on this and will be ready with an amendment before we hit the threshold.
Yeah, and I think that's right. There's it's very interesting, right? The idea that you have 2 tiers, that you just hit this made up number and then all of a sudden you don't get to select your person to run your election office. For those who don't know, I think it's 100. Once you have 135,000 population, then the Secretary of State appoints an election commissioner for your district. That's a little bit two-sided too, though, because then you get an election office, right? And a lot of people forget that, you know, for Jamie Shu, for example, there's all these other responsibilities that a county clerk has besides running an election, right? An election is just one of their many responsibilities. But it's something we've looked at. I don't know if there's a perfect solution, right? There's different opinions on how you find the right balance. One issue, again, is depending on the county, even if you have an election office or if it's your county clerk, it's actually your county commission that decides how much money goes into elections. And we have issues where, you know, an election official, a county clerk, will want to do prepaid return mail ballots or something, and the county commission will refuse to fund it. So that's a whole other, again, there's just so many layers to this that it's not as easy as pointing a finger at one person. One note I will add that I do have a pretty big concern about, we were able to abolish last year the youth census adjustment, which is a big deal. It's a big deal for Douglas County, because in Lawrence, it means that KU students, instead of being counted, you know, instead of being removed from Douglas County and moved to other places, they would be counted in Douglas County, which means that you would, between that and Douglas County population growth, by my estimates, y'all would still not have an election commissioner for at least this decade, but that y'all would actually gain a state representative, right? That probably right over KU, you would gain an entire another state representative. The concern is that how kind of terrible the census has been going. College students weren't on college campuses at a huge part of when they were starting to try to count college students. So there is what I will imagine will probably become a legal battle, because Lawrence probably has, that in any given year, y'all usually have whatever it is, 20,000 people, using your streets, using your infrastructure that should be counted here, that because of COVID for that one period might not be counted here. So that's just something I mentioned to look out for, that we could really see a big legal battle over how that's all counted, because college students weren't at college when they were counting the census.
That's quite true. So, and Seal says 130,000 is the population limit for the elected
Thank you.
Threshold. And then Marcy says amendments have been introduced over the past several years that would change this for Johnson and Sedgwick counties, but the proposals haven't been supported by the majority of the legislature. Yeah. But hopefully we can do something, because, yeah, it would be really nice to keep that election. And then
I guess
go ahead.
Or I was just going to mention really quick, I think the difficult balance too can be in some counties, things like, and I forgot what it is in Douglas, but in some counties these are partisan positions, and it is a difficult balance of, there's 105 counties. Do you really want the most outspoken, maybe, election conspiracy theorist to become the county election official in small counties? And I throw that out there, that I think that can be a concern too, of where do you find that balance? Because I think the goal should be, frankly, the Secretary of State, all of these election positions should be nonpartisan, right? Like a nonpartisan under oath. So that's where I think it gets difficult, is there could be a backfiring thing where counties end up getting like really extreme election commissioners if you do that. So I'll just throw out that kind of consideration.
And then Seal asked, what are your thoughts on the upcoming redistricting?
I know Seal and I have talked about this a couple of times. So I would say that Kansas has better laws than most about redistricting. Like so many things in Kansas, it's because our government was doing it so bad that it kind of had to go back to the courts made them do it much better. In Kansas, to redistrict, so the legislature gets the numbers and they draw the district lines, and then the governor can veto it. But before it can be finally approved, the Kansas Supreme Court has to review it. And this is actually really interesting because anyone can actually go. Like it's like an open thing where anyone can go to the Kansas Supreme Court and say why they think a map is good or bad, or why a certain district was drawn in like a legal or illegal way. So I think that's good, right? That we have a couple layers of like checks and balances to make sure that maps are well drawn. That being said, redistricting is always going to be chaotic, right? Where do you draw the lines? And Kansas has had a huge population shift over the last decade. So many of these districts are going to be going towards, Johnson County, Douglas, this area where in Western Kansas, you're going to have huge fights because giant districts are going to grow bigger. And then you have politicians who are fighting over, who gets drawn out of their district, essentially. So I would say it's going to be a messy process. I think one of the best ways to make it, less messy and facilitate it is having the legislature or the committee set really clear guiding principles, which they have tried to do in past years, to kind of facilitate it and get as much as possible, frankly, get politicians out of it, right? As much as possible, it should be kind of like nonpartisan and research people just trying to build the most reasonable districts for areas. But yes, that is going to be an interesting year for redistricting.
Does anyone else have any questions for Davis? There are so many questions, right? We could talk all afternoon.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody? Okay, well, thank you so much. And you all see just how deserving Davis really is of this award. It's his work is pretty phenomenal. Yeah, and we're very thankful for him. Applause, applause.
All the hands.
Yes.
All the hands.
So, yeah, thank you so much, Davis. And we look forward to you continuing your advocacy very much. And
Thank you.
hopefully we'd like for you, this was Melissa typed this out as we were meeting, but hopefully we usually do this in March. So your platter will say March on it. But hopefully by next March, we can actually have an in-person luncheon, and we would love for you to join us for the next Helen Fluker Award luncheon, please.
Yeah, hey, as long as, who knows what the legislature will look like on any given day, but especially in March of next year. But I would love to. Thank you.
Quite true. All right.
Oh, great. Could I put in a plug for, am I unmuted? Yes, I am. I would like to put in a plug for everyone to join us for our next event, which is the series that we're co-sponsoring with the fabulous Kate Gramlich with the Lawrence Public Library, which is Civic Engagement 101. And on Monday, August 31st at 7 p.m., we'll have Maria Boyd, MS, who is the Tribal Partnership Specialist with the 2020 census. So she'll have some great information, given especially that we've got the census cut a month short. I'm hoping she will have some great tips on what we might be able to do to help that come along. The link is on our social media page and on the library social media page. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Davis.
Thank you so much, Davis. Thanks for being here. And thanks everybody for joining us.
If we're putting in plugs, could I put in a plug for 6 p.m. this evening,
Yes.
where Teresa Briggs and I will be joining Kansas Appleseed and talking about early voting. It will be on Facebook, but it's the link is on both the Lawrence League website and I think the Kansas League website and the Kansas Appleseed website for 6 p.m. this evening. And we have a great slideshow that gives all sorts of information on voting and early voting.
Great.
Great. Thanks so much. Anybody else? All right. Everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks again, Davis, and congratulations. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.